My son and ex-wife abandoned me at the airport as a sick joke, and then they went on our family vacation without me, laughing all the way. I never went back to them. Years later, they discovered my wealth and now they're trying to claim their share as if nothing ever happened. A few days ago, my phone showed 29 missed calls. That's when I realized my revenge was just beginning. I would make them answer for their actions and their audacity. You wouldn't believe what happened next. The phone shattered the silence of my study, like glass hitting marble. I glanced up from the quarterly investment report spread across my mahogany desk. The numbers were slightly blurred in the warm light from my lamp. At 79, my vision isn't what it used to be, but my mind is still as sharp as ever. I reached for the phone, expecting a call from Mr. Thompson at the real estate firm, or maybe from Mary about tomorrow's charity board meeting. Instead, I heard my son's voice. Felt like a physical blow. Dad, I need money now. After 20 years of silence, this was how it ended. There was no apology and no explanation, just a demand. Mark's voice had aged and roughened at the edges, but it carried the same sense of entitlement I remembered from his teenage years. The financial report slipped from my lap, and the pages floated down to the Persian rug. I barely managed to speak, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. Mark? The way he cut off my thought was cold and brutal. He simply said he needed $350,000 by next Friday. Hearing those words felt like ice water coursing through my veins. He wasn't asking or requesting. He was demanding, as if my money was already his, simply waiting for him to collect. My own words felt unsteady. You need? I slowly stood up, my legs a little shaky. Mark dismissed my reaction, saying he didn't have time for my wounded feelings. He went on to say that he'd found out about my little real estate empire and that $12 million wasn't bad for someone who used to fix toilets. My hand tightened on the phone. He'd been watching me and researching me, calculating my worth as if I were a piece of property at an auction. Mark's voice grew sharper as he explained that the people he owed money to wouldn't wait for a family reunion, and that they would break things, important things. He then laid out how this would work. I'd transfer the money and he'd disappear again, and everyone would stay healthy. A memory slammed into me like a sledgehammer. Los Angeles International Airport, 2005. My suitcase was heavy in my hand as I clutched my boarding pass. I watched Mark and Sarah walk away, their laughter echoing through the terminal. I could still hear his words. Let's see how he finds his way home. That laugh was cold, dismissive, and final. Mark's voice broke my train of thought, asking if I was still there. I was there, but I wasn't the same man who had stood abandoned in that airport 20 years ago. I wasn't the broke handyman who had worked 3 jobs to pay for Mark's college. I wasn't the fool who had believed family meant something. My voice had found its strength. I'm here, he said. Good. So we understand each other. I replied that we understood each other perfectly. The answer is no. Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. He asked me what I had just said. My reply was simple. No. It was a 2-letter word, but it held so much meaning. I told him that his expensive education should have covered basic vocabulary. His voice cracked with panic as he asked if I thought this was a joke. I replied by asking what these people would do, come after a broke old man. I told him that he had miscalculated. He insisted that he knew exactly what I was worth. I asked him if he really did. I explained that the man he had left in that airport had nothing but a suitcase and a lesson he would never forget. He tried to justify it by saying that it was different because they were young and had made mistakes. I simply said that they had made choices, and now I was making mine. The line went dead. I stood in my study, surrounded by the evidence of everything I had built without them. The harbor lights twinkled through my floor-to-ceiling windows, and each one was a reminder of how far I'd climbed from that abandoned man in the airport. My untouched scotch sat on the side table, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. I had poured it an hour ago to celebrate another successful quarter, but now it felt like preparation for a war. The clock on my desk ticked steadily, and in just 10 minutes, my entire world had shifted. I walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass. For 20 years, I had wondered if they would ever reach out. For 20 years, I had imagined what I might say and how I might forgive. But forgiveness requires remorse, and Mark had offered none, only demands and threats, and the assumption that blood trumped betrayal. Mark had done his homework and knew about the real estate holdings, the investment portfolio, and even the charity donations. But he had missed the most important detail. I wasn't the same man anymore. His voice echoed in the silence, but it wasn't his voice anymore. It was younger and crueler, laughing somewhere behind me in the chaos of Los Angeles International Airport. June 8, 2005. Terminal 3. The memory hit me like stepping through a doorway into hell. I was 49 again, standing at gate 27 with 3 boarding passes clutched in my sweaty palm. The vacation had taken months to plan, and I had scraped together $8,000 from overtime shifts and borrowed against our mortgage to pay for it. John, sweetie, could you get us coffee? Sarah's voice had that particular tone she used when she wanted something. She wanted the good kind from a fancy shop down the terminal. Mark and I will watch the bags, she'd said. I had practically bounced to my feet. After months of cold shoulders and tense dinners, she was asking me for something and using endearments. Maybe this trip would fix us after all. Of course, I replied. Just get whatever's expensive, she'd said, not looking up from her magazine. The coffee shop was 200 yards away, past security checkpoints and moving walkways. I carried that cardboard tray as if it held liquid gold, dodging tourists and crying children, the hot cups burning my palms through the thin holders. When I returned, our gate was empty. Not just our seats, but the entire waiting area had cleared for the next flight. Our luggage was gone, and Sarah's magazine was abandoned on the floor, its pages scattered by rushing feet. A gate agent, a tired woman with kind eyes, held a folded piece of paper and told me my family had asked her to give it to me. My hands shook as I opened it. Sarah's precise handwriting was like a tiny knife. This isn't working. Don't follow us. That's when I heard it. Mark's laughter carrying over the departure announcements from somewhere near the boarding bridge. It was young and breathless with excitement. Let's see how he finds his way home. The words cut through the terminal noise like broken glass. I stood there holding 3 cups of coffee that cost $47, watching other families board their flights. A toddler pointed at me from her father's arms, and an elderly couple whispered behind their hands. 20 years of marriage were gone with a note. A security guard approached because I had been standing there for too long, looking suspicious with my abandoned coffee and confused expression. I had to explain about the luggage, the tickets that were in Sarah's name, and the hotel reservation I couldn't access. The guard said I would need to contact the airline about changing my ticket. But there was no ticket for me to change. They had booked everything, and I had nothing but a carry-on bag and the clothes on my back. The journey home took 14 hours, 2 buses, a train, and finally a taxi that cost more than I had in my wallet. The driver waited while I stumbled into our empty house, searching for cash in the kitchen drawers. Every room echoed with their absence. Closets were half empty, and Mark's graduation photos were gone from the mantel. 20 years of shared life were reduced to missing spaces. But that night, sitting in my dark kitchen with the divorce papers already waiting on the counter, something crystallized in the silence. They thought they had destroyed me. They were wrong. March 15, 2025. My study. The memory faded like smoke, leaving me standing by my floor-to-ceiling windows with their view of San Diego Harbor. My reflection stared back, older now, wearing a $1,000 shirt in a house worth $3 million. The abandoned man from LAX was gone. In his place stood someone they had never bothered to know, someone with $12 million reasons to remember exactly what betrayal felt like. My phone lay silent on the desk, and Mark's threats were still echoing in the mahogany-paneled room. He had given me 10 days, he'd said, 10 days before his dangerous friends came calling. I picked up my scotch and finally took that first sip. The amber liquid burned, but not as much as the memory. They had taught me the most valuable lesson of my life in that airport terminal. Family was earned, not inherited, and respect had a price they were about to learn. I pressed my palm against the mahogany surface of my desk, feeling the smooth grain beneath the expensive polish. This desk alone cost more than I had made in an entire year back then. But that broken man stumbling home from LAX had learned something precious in that terminal. He had learned that depending on others was a luxury he couldn't afford. August 2005. I was living in a studio apartment in East LA that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. It cost $600 a month and was paid for with the last of my divorce settlement. The refrigerator held expired milk and a whole lot of determination, but nothing else. I would stare at classified ads until my eyes burned, circling job listings with a dying pen. Handyman, maintenance worker, security guard. Anything that didn't require references from a wife who had abandoned me. But late at night, when sirens wailed through the thin walls, I studied something else. Real estate listings. Specifically, properties nobody wanted in neighborhoods everyone avoided. That duplex in Chula Vista changed everything. The listing had been up for months. It was going for $85,000 for a structure that looked like it had survived a war. The walls were covered in graffiti, the windows were broken, and the previous tenants had disappeared owing 3 months' rent. Everyone else saw problems, but I saw potential. My last $15,000 went toward the down payment. The bank officer looked at me as if I were insane. A 49-year-old divorced man with no job, betting everything on a disaster. He warned me that the property had significant challenges. I told him that I had been challenged before. For 3 months, I worked 18-hour days, patching drywall, replacing fixtures, and learning plumbing from YouTube videos. My hands bled from the rough work, but each repair felt like I was building something they couldn't take away. The first tenant paid her rent in cash. Her name was Maria, a single mother who worked double shifts at the hospital. She looked at the fresh paint and functioning heater as if I had handed her a palace. "Thank you for giving us a chance," she whispered. No one had ever thanked me before. By 2007, I owned 3 properties, small buildings, nothing fancy, but each one generated income while I slept. Income they couldn't steal with a boarding pass and a cruel laugh. The 2008 recession hit like a sledgehammer. Property values plummeted and banks tightened credit. Other investors panicked and sold at a loss. I bought everything I could. Distressed properties at 50 cents on the dollar and foreclosures from families who had overextended. I felt sorry for them, but sentiment doesn't pay mortgages. By 2010, my portfolio included 8 residential units that generated $43,000 annually. I wasn't wealthy, but I was stable and independent. Then Mr. Thompson approached me about the downtown project. He said I understood troubled properties. He explained that this commercial development was bleeding money, and the previous investors had pulled out. But, he said, if someone could see past the problems, there was a lot of potential. The price was $2. $5 million, more than I had ever risked, and it would require me to leverage everything I had built. The project was half-finished in downtown San Diego, with concrete bones reaching toward the empty sky. City permits were tangled in red tape, and the construction crews had long since left. Everyone saw an expensive mistake, but I saw downtown revitalization before it happened. It took 18 months of negotiations, permit battles, and construction nightmares. I slept in the site trailer more nights than in my apartment. Every morning brought new problems. Cost overruns, permit delays, and contractors who disappeared with their advance payments. But every evening, I would stand on the unfinished roof and watch the harbor lights twinkle in the distance. It was the same view I would have from my study years later. When we sold the developed complex in 2015, my share was $6. $2 million. That night, I bought this house with cash. Now, I run my fingers along financial reports showing properties across 3 counties. My monthly rental income is $67,000, and my investment portfolio is worth $4. $8 million. My real estate equity is $7. $2 million, bringing my total net worth to $12. $3 million. Not bad for someone who used to fix toilets. The intercom on my desk blinked with an incoming call from my property manager. Even at 8 p.m. The business never sleeps. But tonight, I let it ring. Tonight, I was remembering exactly how it felt to build everything from nothing, and how it felt when someone thought they could just demand it away. My phone lies silent beside the reports, but Mark's threat is still echoing in the mahogany-paneled room. He had given me 10 days, he'd said. 10 days before his dangerous friends came calling. He had no idea who he was threatening. The abandoned man from the airport was gone. In his place stood someone who had turned humiliation into an empire and transformed betrayal into unshakable strength. Someone who was about to remind a spoiled son exactly what consequences looked like. The quiet lasted for exactly 12 minutes. I had just finished organizing my financial reports, savoring the satisfaction of reviewing my transformation, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. It was a San Diego area code, but not one I recognized. I let it ring. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Same number. Then again. By the 5th call in 20 minutes, I silenced the phone and moved to my bedroom. Whoever was calling could leave a message, but they didn't stop. Throughout the evening, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree, with silent flashes in the darkness. Each one was another attempted invasion of my peace. I had built this life precisely to avoid such interruptions. By midnight, curiosity finally won. I checked the call log. 18 missed calls, all from the same number, and 1 voicemail. I pressed play, and 20 years collapsed into nothing. "John, darling, it's Sarah." Her voice had aged, roughened by cigarettes and disappointment, but it still carried that syrupy tone she used when she wanted something. She said that Mark had told her about our little conversation earlier, and that she thought there had been a misunderstanding. My hand tightened on the phone as she said we needed to talk about this situation like adults. "Family shouldn't treat family this way, don't you think?" she asked. The word family tasted like poison. I deleted the message and went back to bed, but she kept calling. I listened to a second message. "John, I know you're getting these. This is important. Mark made a mistake, yes, but he's still your son, your only son. Surely that means something to you." A few hours later, at 3:45 a.m., she left a 7th message. She said I couldn't just ignore them forever. She said she knew what kind of man I was deep down, and that the John she married would never abandon his family when they needed help most. The John she married? The fool who had believed her lies. Another message came in a few minutes later. She was getting hoarse now, and desperation was creeping through her practiced manipulation. She said it was ridiculous that I had millions of dollars sitting in the bank while my son faced serious consequences. She asked what kind of father that made me. She called again. Her voice was becoming strained as she said that Mark didn't choose to have gambling problems and that those kinds of things run in families. She suggested that if his father had been around more, he might have shown him a better example. Even now, she was blaming me for Mark's choices. I listened to her final message. Her voice sounded genuinely frightened for the first time in hours. She said, "Please, John, I'm asking you. No, I'm begging you. Help him. Help us. Whatever happened between us, Mark shouldn't have to pay for it. He's scared, John. Really scared, and I don't know what else to do." I sat up in bed as dawnlight filtered through my bedroom windows. 29 missed calls, 24 voicemails, and 10 hours of relentless harassment from a woman who had walked away from me in an airport terminal 20 years ago. Now she was begging. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. I scrolled through the messages again, listening to her voice deteriorate from false sweetness to raw desperation. The same woman who had orchestrated my abandonment, who had laughed at my humiliation, and who had stolen 20 years of my life with my son. She had called me every possible name. Selfish, cruel, heartless, and unnatural. She had tried guilt, manipulation, threats, and finally pleading, the full arsenal of emotional warfare she had always used. But she had forgotten something crucial. I wasn't that broken man from the airport anymore. I had learned her tactics, understood her games, and built defenses she couldn't penetrate. More importantly, I had learned patience. I reached for the legal pad on my nightstand, the one I used for business planning. But this morning, I had a different kind of business to attend to. At the top of the page, I wrote 2 names: Mark Collins, Sarah Collins. Below that, I wrote current assets, debts, dependencies, vulnerabilities. They had spent 20 years assuming I would remain the same fool they had abandoned. It was time to show them exactly how wrong they were. I set the phone down and walked to my office, leaving Sarah's desperate voice behind in the bedroom. My computer hummed to life while I made coffee, the familiar routine grounding me in the present moment. 29 calls and 10 hours of harassment. And now they expected what? Gratitude for the wake-up call? I opened my laptop and pulled up a fresh document. At the top, I typed, Collins Family Assessment, March 16, 2025. Below that, I created 2 columns, assets and liabilities. It was time to conduct some due diligence. Mark's digital footprint was surprisingly sparse. His LinkedIn showed no activity in 18 months. The last entry was a vague, seeking new opportunities post that reeked of desperation. His Facebook profile was locked down tight, offering only a profile picture from 2019 and a handful of public check-ins at various bars and restaurants. But public records told a different story. He'd had 3 address changes in 2 years. The most recent was 892 Elm Drive, a rundown complex in East County where rent was about $800 a month. Before that, Pine Street, then Oak Avenue. Always moving, always running. Court records revealed even more. Mark Collins was the defendant in 3 small claims cases totaling $47,000 for unpaid debts, broken lease agreements, and defaulted personal loans. The pattern painted itself clearly. A man spiraling downward, burning bridges faster than he could build them. I cross-referenced his current address with property records. The building, owned by Riverside Management Company, showed multiple units with frequent tenant turnover. Online reviews complained of broken air conditioning, pest problems, and an indifferent landlord. My son, the one who had laughed at my abandonment 20 years ago, now lived in the kind of place I had escaped in 2005. I found Sarah's trail leading to the Garden Vista Apartments. She was living in Unit 3B, a place that cost $950 a month and was advertised as being senior-friendly and comfortably affordable. The pictures showed a complex with vinyl siding and chain-link fences, a stark contrast to the suburban dream home we had once shared. Her social media activity painted a very different picture. She was complaining about rising Medicare costs, grocery prices, and utility bills, and her posts were filled with requests for recommendations on budget-friendly everything, from doctors and mechanics to restaurants. The same woman who had once spent $200 on a single dinner now clipped digital coupons and shared articles about increases in Social Security benefits. Divorce records showed her subsequent marriages. She was married to a man named Robert Smith from 2008 to 2012, and then to James Evans from 2015 to 2018. The official reason for both separations was irreconcilable differences. But the property settlements showed a consistent pattern of her getting less and less with each one. It seemed that any assets she had gained from our divorce had been steadily depleted through a series of failed relationships and poor financial decisions. By 9:30, I had a complete picture of their situation. Mark was unemployed and deep in debt, and was even facing eviction based on late rent notices that had been filed in public records. His vehicle registration showed a 2018 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on it, a car he obviously owned out of necessity, not choice. Sarah was on a fixed income, lived in a modest apartment, and had no assets beyond her basic household items. A tax lien filed in 2023 showed that she owed the state $4,000 in back payments. They weren't just desperate, they were drowning. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a house worth $3 million, reviewing investment portfolios that generated more monthly income than either of them earned in an entire year. The irony was almost poetic. I leaned back in my chair, studying the spreadsheet I had created. Their combined monthly income, from Mark's unemployment and Sarah's Social Security, was less than what I paid my housekeeper. The same people who had abandoned me at the airport, walking away and laughing as I held 3 boarding passes to nowhere, were now living paycheck to paycheck in the very America they had assumed I would never escape. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They had contacted me. After 20 years of silence, a single desperate phone call and a night of harassment had given them away. They had shown me their hand, revealing their complete financial vulnerability, combined with the same entitled arrogance that had defined our relationship decades ago. In business, I had learned to recognize when opportunity was disguised as a crisis. This situation presented both. I opened a new browser tab and typed, Debt Collection Agency San Diego. If Mark owed $350,000 to dangerous people, then those people had names, businesses, and business records. I knew that everything was traceable if you knew where to look. My coffee had gone cold while I worked, but my purpose had become crystal clear and focused. They wanted money, and I was going to give them exactly what they deserved. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Richard's number. If anyone knew how to acquire distressed debt at a discount, it would be my business partner. It was time to turn their desperation into my advantage. The phone rang twice before Richard's familiar voice answered. He asked what he could do for me. I told him that I needed some discreet legal work related to debt acquisition. He paused and said that was unusual for me. I explained that it was a personal matter related to real estate and that I wanted to purchase some distressed consumer debt. I assured him that the work would be completely legitimate and that all proper documentation would be provided. He asked how much we were talking about, and I told him it had a face value of $350,000 and that I would pay the fair market rate. He paused again, a little longer this time, and then said that it would probably cost me around $85,000 assuming standard collection agency rates. He asked if I was sure about this, and I reflected on the amount, thinking that it was less than what I had paid for my kitchen renovation last year. I confirmed that I was sure and asked him how quickly he could move on it. He told me to give him the debtor information, and that if the paperwork was clean, his team could have everything transferred within 72 hours. I gave him Mark's full name, address, and social security number, which were all details I had gathered from public records during my research. Richard's team was efficient. By Thursday afternoon, they had identified 7 different creditors who held pieces of Mark's gambling debts. The largest was Riverside Recovery Services, a legitimate collection agency that had purchased Mark's casino markers at a discount. They were happy to sell for 22 cents on the dollar in what they called a professional courtesy between businesses. Pacific Credit Solutions held another chunk of the debt from unpaid personal loans that Mark had defaulted on 6 months ago. They accepted 18 cents on the dollar for their share. By Friday morning, Richard called me with an update. He told me that we had acquired approximately 92% of the outstanding debt, for a total investment of $87,200. He said that the remaining creditors were either not interested in selling or couldn't be reached. I said that was fine and asked about our legal position. He explained that I now held collection rights for $323,000 in legitimately transferred debt. He said his team had prepared all the documentation through subsidiary companies so that my name wouldn't appear directly on any paperwork. I said that was perfect, anonymous but legal. I asked when Mark would be notified. Richard explained that certified letters would be going out that afternoon. The legal requirement was to provide 48 hours advance notice before we could begin any collection activities. I checked my calendar and noted the date, March 19th, 2 p.m. Mark would receive his surprise on a Wednesday afternoon, just as the pressure from his original deadline was mounting. I told Richard to make sure the notification emphasized an accelerated payment schedule, with the full amount due within 72 hours of the notice. He warned me that this was aggressive since most collection agencies offer payment plans. I told him we were not most collection agencies. That Friday evening, I sat in my study reviewing the final paperwork. It was clean, professional, and legally bulletproof. Mark Collins now owed Meridian Asset Recovery LLC, my shell company, $323,000 with full payment demanded by Saturday afternoon. The irony tasted so sweet. The same man who had demanded money from me 5 days ago was now facing consequences he had never imagined. Saturday passed quietly. Sunday morning brought a light rain against my office windows as I waited. On Wednesday afternoon at exactly 2:15, my secure business line rang. It was Patricia Lee from Meridian Asset Recovery. She told me they had just completed notification to the debtor and that the certified mail had been signed for at 2:03 p.m. I asked if there was any immediate response. She told me it was the usual shock, denial, and claims of impossibility. She said that Mark had asked who owned the company, but that they were not required to disclose that information. I imagined Mark standing in his shabby apartment, holding legal documents that had transformed his world in just 17 minutes. It was the same apartment I had discovered through my research, an $800 a month rental in a complex that smelled like failure and broken dreams. I told her to keep me informed of any contact attempts. The next hour crawled by as I knew Mark was reading the documents now, understanding that his $350,000 problem had become a $323,000 emergency with a Saturday deadline. He would be calculating the dates, realizing that he had exactly 71 hours to produce more money than he had ever possessed. He would panic. At 3:47, Patricia called again. She said that the debtor had just contacted their office and was quite distressed, asking about payment plans, extensions, and verification of debt ownership. I asked her what she had told him. She said that she had followed the standard procedures, explaining that full documentation was available for review, but that payment plans were not currently offered. She added that he had 71 hours to send the full payment or face additional collection actions. It was excellent. The same voice that had laughed at my airport abandonment 20 years ago was now pleading with collection agents about money he could not possibly raise. But this was just the beginning. My phone was ringing before I had even set the legal documents down. I listened as Mark's voice crackled through the speaker. He told his mother that something bad had happened. Her voice was tired and irritated as she asked him what it was. Mark said they had sold his debt, all of it, to some company called Meridian Asset Recovery. There was a moment of silence as she asked what he meant. He said his hands were shaking as he read from the official letterhead that he owed $323,000 and that it was due in full by Saturday afternoon. Otherwise, they would initiate seizure proceedings. She said that was impossible and that debt didn't just transfer like that. He insisted that it was all there in the legal documents and that they had bought everything from the collection agencies. She paused for a moment, a little longer this time, and then said that it was Wednesday and that Saturday was only 3 days away. He said he knew. At exactly 4 o'clock, my phone rang. The voice was professional and unfamiliar. It was Jennifer Roberts from Meridian Asset Recovery, and she wanted to discuss my payment arrangements. I told her I needed more time and that this had just happened today. She said their records showed that I had been aware of these obligations for several months and that the transfer notice simply changed the creditor, not my responsibility. I insisted that 3 days was impossible. She said she understood that this created pressure, but that their company had specific policies regarding payment timelines. She asked me if I could propose a realistic settlement amount. I calculated frantically, my mind racing. I knew my unemployment benefits were $800 a month, and my savings account held only $47. I realized I didn't have anything close to that amount. She said that, in that case, they would need to discuss asset evaluation and garnishment procedures. She told me our next contact would be at 8 p.m. that evening, and the line went dead. By 6 o'clock, I had called Sarah 4 times, and each conversation was the same desperate loop. There was no money, no options, and no idea who was behind this. She told me to calm down and let her think. I told her there was nothing to think about and that I owed more money than I would make in 5 years. I pointed out that someone had bought this debt specifically, and that it cost money. I asked her why they would do that. She paused and then said that maybe they wanted control over me. The 8 p.m. call came exactly on schedule. It was another professional voice, but a different name this time. David Brooks from Meridian's legal department. He said they had reviewed my case and needed to inform me of the potential consequences. My apartment felt smaller with each word he said. Asset seizure, credit destruction, garnishment of future income, and legal proceedings that would begin Monday if the payment wasn't received. Thursday morning, I received a certified letter with the same message and official language, and the countdown timer now showed 51 hours remaining. Thursday afternoon, another call came in, a different voice from the same company. They said they had attempted to reach me multiple times and that their client was prepared to consider a settlement, but that time was critical. I asked who their client was. The voice said that that information wasn't required for debt collection purposes. I insisted that someone had to own this debt and that someone had made the decision to buy it. They replied that their company managed the accounts professionally and that the ownership structure wasn't relevant to my payment obligations. There were 43 hours remaining. That Thursday evening, Sarah called me. She told me she had been researching the Meridian Company and that they did, in fact, exist. Their business license had been filed 3 weeks ago, and the address was a law office in downtown San Diego. She said that 3 weeks ago was right after I had called my father. My blood went cold. I tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, but she asked if it really was one. She pointed out that I had called John asking for money and he had refused, and 3 days later some mysterious company had acquired all my debt and was demanding payment in 72 hours. I sat down heavily on my couch, the one piece of furniture the previous tenants had left behind. She asked if I thought my dad was behind this. I said I thought someone with a lot of money and a grudge had bought my debt for pennies on the dollar, and I said that I thought we both knew who had the money and the reasons to want me desperate. The room spun slightly, and I thought how cruel it was. Sarah reminded me that we had left him stranded at an airport 20 years ago. She said that if John was behind this, cruel didn't begin to describe what he was planning. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was a final notice with 31 hours remaining, and the next contact would include an asset evaluation team. I showed the message to Sarah when she arrived an hour later. She studied it with the same calculating, suspicious, and ready-for-war expression she had worn during her own divorce proceedings. She finally said that someone was doing this to us deliberately. She also said that if it was John, he was about to learn that we wouldn't give up without a fight. Before she had even finished speaking, I grabbed my phone and said we needed to meet tonight, right now. She said it was past 6 and asked where. I told her Mel's Diner on University Avenue, the one with the broken neon sign, and that we should meet at 10 p.m. She said that was 4 hours away, and that she needed time to think and I needed time to pull myself together. She said we were going to figure out who was behind this, and then we were going to make them pay. The phone went dead in my hands. Mel's Diner was located between a pawn shop and a check-cashing place, its fluorescent lights flickering through grease-stained windows. I found Sarah in a back corner booth with 2 cups of coffee growing cold between manila folders and a stack of printouts. She told me to sit down because we had work to do. I slid across the cracked vinyl seat and asked what all the research was about. She explained that she had been thinking about the timeline I had mentioned. She said that my father had refused to help on Sunday night, and by Wednesday afternoon, some mysterious company owned all my debt. She insisted that it wasn't a coincidence, but a strategy. She spread papers across the scratched tabletop. Business registration forms, corporate filings, and attorney listings. She said that Meridian Asset Recovery LLC had been formed on March 16th, just 3 days after my father had hung up on me. My coffee tasted like burnt desperation. I said that it meant someone with serious money had moved very quickly to control my situation. Someone who knew exactly what I owed, who I owed it to, and how to buy it. I asked her how my dad would have known all that. She said that it was all in public records, court filings and collection agency databases, and that if you knew what you were looking for and had the right connections, financial information wasn't that hard to find. She pointed to another document showing that Meridian's legal representation was a firm called Walsh, Richard, and Associates in downtown San Diego. I told her that I had never heard of them. She said she had and that they handled my father's commercial real estate deals. She insisted that it was the same firm and the same lawyers who had helped my father build his fortune who were now destroying my life. The diner's jukebox wheezed out a country song about lost chances. 3 tables away, a tired waitress refilled the coffee for a trucker who looked as desperate as I felt. I asked her what we should do. Sarah's eyes had that same calculating, sharp, and predatory look I remembered from her own divorce proceedings. She said we would use what we knew, pointing out that my father might have money now, but he was still the same man we had walked away from 20 years ago, with the same weaknesses and the same need to be loved and accepted. I replied that I didn't think he had spent 2 decades building this fortune just to prove something to us or to show us what we had thrown away. She insisted that deep down, he was still the abandoned man we had left at the airport. She gathered the papers into neat stacks and said that we were going to remind him exactly what family meant. I asked her what we would do if that didn't work. She said we would remind him what family could cost. We spent the next 6 hours researching everything we could find out about my father's current life, including his $3 million house in La Jolla, his business partnerships, and his charitable donations. The man who used to clip coupons now donated $50,000 annually to various causes. By dawn, Sarah had assembled what she called our leverage portfolio. She said that we knew he was successful, but also that he was alone, with no wife, no social media presence, and no evidence of close relationships. She said he had built an empire, but he had built it in isolation. She pulled out the final document and said that our advantage was that he still cared what people thought about him. She pointed to his charity donations to hospital wings, scholarship funds, and community centers. She insisted that it wasn't a tax strategy. It was reputation management. I still didn't understand how this would help. She said it was simple. We would walk into his beautiful house and remind him that family wasn't something you could buy or control. We would tell him that if he didn't resolve my debt situation immediately, we would make sure everyone in San Diego knew exactly what kind of man John Collins really was. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I said it was almost 2 p.m. and that I had less than 24 hours. She replied that we had better get moving. She stood up, leaving a $5 tip for the coffee we had barely touched. She told me to get my car and that we were driving to La Jolla right now. She said that if he wanted to play power games, that was fine, but he was about to learn that some games had consequences he had never considered. Walking out of that diner felt like stepping off a cliff. With only 18 hours left before financial destruction, cliff jumping seemed like our only option. Sarah climbed into the passenger seat with the confidence of someone who had manipulated her way out of problems before. She had no idea what we were walking into. The drive through La Jolla felt like entering another world. Manicured lawns stretched behind tall hedges, and Mediterranean-style mansions were perched on cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. My Honda Civic wheezed up winding roads that seemed designed for vehicles far more expensive than mine. Sarah directed me to turn left at the next intersection, studying the address she had written on a napkin. She said that my father's house should be the third one on the right. When we found it, I had to pull over just to stare. The house rose from perfectly landscaped grounds, looking like something straight out of an architecture magazine. It was made of glass and stone, with clean, modern lines and a circular driveway that could park 6 cars. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the afternoon sun, and a fountain bubbled peacefully near the entrance. Sarah whispered that this was what $3 million looked like. I had always imagined my father living comfortably, but this was wealth on a scale I couldn't comprehend. The man who used to argue with cashiers over expired coupons now owned a house that belonged in a Hollywood movie. She told me to focus and said that we would stick to the plan. Family obligations, emotional appeals, and public reputation threats if necessary. My legs felt unsteady as we walked up the stone pathway. Before we could even ring the doorbell, the heavy wooden door opened, and my father stood in the doorway, wearing a navy sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The last 20 years had been kind to him. He looked healthy, confident, and completely at ease. He greeted us with a voice that carried no emotion whatsoever and said that he had been expecting us. The foyer opened into a living room with cathedral ceilings and marble floors. Original artwork was hanging on the walls, and leather furniture was arranged around a fireplace that could have heated my entire apartment. He told us to sit down. Sarah perched on the edge of a chair that looked like it came from an Italian showroom. I sank into the couch on the other side, feeling as if my presence was contaminating it. Sarah said we needed to talk about the debt situation. My father replied that he assumed we meant the Meridian asset recovery matter. His calmness unnerved me. This wasn't the reaction we had prepared for. Sarah continued by telling him he knew exactly what we meant, and that the timing wasn't coincidental. She said that I had called him on Sunday, he had refused to help, and by Wednesday, some mysterious company owned all my debt. He calmly agreed that the timing was indeed significant and settled into his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who was completely in control, though maybe not in the way we had imagined. I told him that I didn't care who owned the debt, that I was his son, and that I needed help now. He said that I had also needed help 20 years ago in an airport terminal and asked if I remembered what had happened then. His words hit me like cold water, and I said that it was different. He asked if it was, and he said that I had needed something from him, he couldn't provide it, and I had walked away laughing. Sarah leaned forward, switching to her concerned voice, saying we were young and had made mistakes. She insisted that this was about my future. My father disagreed, saying that this was about consequences, something we both seemed to have forgotten existed. He stood and walked to a built-in bookshelf, returning with a manila folder. He told us that Meridian Asset Recovery LLC had been formed on March 16th, that the total investment in distressed debt acquisition had been $87,200, and that the current value of the acquired obligations was $323,000. My mouth went dry. I whispered that he had actually bought it. He replied that he had bought every penny of it through proper legal channels as a completely legitimate business transaction with full documentation. I asked him why he had done it. He simply said it was because 20 years ago, we had taught him that family meant nothing when it was inconvenient, and that love disappears when money gets tight, and promises break when they are tested. He opened the folder and spread the documents across the coffee table, legal papers, bank transfers, and collection agency correspondence. He said that he had decided to test that theory, to see what happens when family becomes very expensive indeed. Sarah's composure finally cracked, and she called him a vindictive monster. He replied that I had been his son in 2005 too, but that hadn't stopped me from abandoning him with 3 boarding passes and a broken heart. She said we had been kids. He pointed out that I had been 22, old enough to serve in the military, old enough to vote, and old enough to understand that actions have consequences, just not old enough to care about anyone but myself. I felt the room spinning slightly and begged him for help, reminding him that I had less than 10 hours. He replied that he knew exactly how much time I had because he was the one who controlled it. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. 20 years of separation and unspoken pain were now laid bare in a living room that was worth more than most people's annual income. Sarah finally asked him what he wanted. He smiled for the first time since we had arrived, but it was not a pleasant expression. He said that he wanted us to understand what we had created in that airport terminal, and then he wanted us to choose. He stood, straightening his sweater with the same calm precision he had maintained throughout our confrontation. He led us to his office for the formal terms. The hallway was lined with framed business achievements, awards, newspaper clippings, and photos of ribbon cuttings and charity events. 20 years of success documented like evidence in a court case. His office was intimidating in its professional perfection, with floor-to-ceiling law books, a mahogany desk that could seat 8 people for dinner, and leather chairs that probably cost more than my car. 2 manila folders sat precisely centered on the desk's polished surface. He settled behind the desk while Sarah and I took the chairs facing him. The power dynamic was unmistakable. We were supplicants in his domain. He pointed out that I currently owed Meridian Asset Recovery $323,000, and that the payment was due in exactly 7 hours and 42 minutes. My stomach lurched. He said he was offering us a choice, 2 options that were both completely legal, and both with clear consequences. He opened the first folder and presented option A, a public acknowledgement of our actions in 2005 along with a formal apology. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper as she asked what kind of acknowledgement. He explained that it would be a written statement published in the San Diego Union Tribune within 48 hours, with additional posts on our social media accounts. He slid a typed document across the desk and said that the language was specific. We would acknowledge that we had abandoned our father at Los Angeles International Airport as what we had termed a cruel joke. We would also admit that our actions had caused unjust suffering and state that the consequences we face today were directly earned through our choices. I stared at the paper, but my hands were shaking too much to pick it up. I asked him what would happen if we did this. He replied that the debt would disappear completely, with no collection activity, credit reporting, or legal action. We would walk away with a clean slate. Sarah asked about option B, though she sounded like she already knew. He opened the second folder and described standard debt collection through the legal system. He said that a lawsuit would be filed within 24 hours, followed by asset seizure, wage garnishment, and credit reporting. all of which would be public court records. I pointed out that I didn't have any wages to garnish. He replied that my Social Security benefits could be partially garnished for legitimate debts, as could my mother's if she had provided any financial assistance. Sarah went pale, asking if he would really go after her benefits. He said he wouldn't, but the legal system would, following standard collection procedures. He leaned back in his chair with his fingers steepled and said that I had approximately 7 hours to decide. He said that if we chose option A, the statement had to be submitted to the newspaper and posted online before midnight on Sunday. If we missed that deadline, option B would automatically proceed. Sarah called it blackmail, but he replied that blackmail involved threatening to reveal secrets, and this involved consequences for documented actions, adding that everything he was requesting was factually accurate. I finally managed to pick up the apology statement. The words seemed to swim on the page. In June 2005, we abandoned Daniel Collins at Los Angeles International Airport, leaving him stranded with prepaid tickets to a family vacation. We did this as what we called a cruel joke, laughing as we boarded our flight without him. Our actions were selfish, heartless, and inexcusable. The financial consequences we face today are directly earned through our choices. I told him that he wanted us to humiliate ourselves publicly. He replied that he wanted us to tell the truth publicly and that the humiliation was our perception, not his intention. I worried about my future and that if this was in the newspapers, employers would see it. He replied that employers could also see bankruptcy filings, court judgments, and collection lawsuits, and that option A was significantly less damaging to my long-term prospects. The office fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the bookshelf. 7 hours. 7 hours to choose between public shame and financial destruction. I told Sarah that I couldn't survive bankruptcy and that the stress alone would finish what the debt collectors had started. She looked at the document again, her lips moving silently as she read. When she finished, she set it down with the careful precision of someone handling explosives. She asked him if he would really forgive the entire debt if we agreed to this. He replied that the moment our social media posts went live and the newspaper confirmed publication, all collection activity would stop permanently. She asked him what would happen if we refused, and he replied that we would then discover exactly how efficient the legal system can be when someone has the resources to use it properly. Sarah closed her eyes and asked how long we had to decide. He checked his watch again and said 7 hours and 38 minutes. My debit card was declined at the gas station on Friday morning. I told the attendant to try it again, but my hands were already shaking. The attendant said that the machine showed insufficient funds and that the account was restricted, and asked if I had another form of payment. I checked my phone and saw 3 missed calls from First National Bank, 2 from my credit card company, and a notification that my automatic rent payment had been rejected. 24 hours. It had taken exactly 24 hours for Daniel's legal machine to begin dismantling my life. The certified mail was waiting for me when I got home. 3 thick envelopes marked "Legal Notice" in red letters. I tore them open with trembling fingers and found Collins versus Collins, San Diego Superior Court, Asset Seizure Order, Case JAS 20258847, and Notice of Garnishment, all from Meridian Asset Recovery, LLC. The language was dense, professional, and terrifying, with court dates, response deadlines, and asset inventories. They wanted everything: my bank accounts, personal property, and future earnings. My phone rang and it was Sarah. She said they had frozen her accounts too, including her Social Security and savings. She asked me how it was legal, and I replied that apparently she had co-signed something years ago, maybe a car loan. The lawyer she had called said that they could garnish Social Security for legitimate debts. I laughed, but it came out like a sob. She said that she had called a lawyer, but that the consultation had cost a $5,000 retainer. The next wave hit on Sunday with eviction notices. Mine arrived with a sheriff's deputy at 7 a.m. and was official and final. Sarah's came an hour later, and she said we had 30 days to vacate the premises or face forcible removal. I asked her where we were supposed to go, but she said she honestly didn't know. By Monday, the desperation had turned systematic. Sarah arrived at my apartment with a legal pad covered in phone numbers and a plan that felt like clutching at smoke. We would call everyone, old friends, distant relatives, and anyone who might help. The conversations all followed the same pattern. Initial sympathy, growing discomfort, and polite excuses like, "I wish I could help, but this sounds complicated, and maybe you should. Have you tried calling?" Nobody wanted to touch a legal mess that involved hundreds of thousands of dollars and a man with the resources to pursue collection systematically. The motel room cost $47 a night. The sun set on a stretch of highway where palm trees grew through cracked asphalt and a neon sign buzzed with electrical problems. Sarah sat on one of the twin beds, surrounded by legal papers we couldn't afford to fight and bills we couldn't afford to pay. She finally said that he had planned this perfectly. I asked her what she meant. She said the timing, the multiple lawsuits, the account freezes. She pointed out that even if we found a lawyer, we would be fighting on 6 different fronts: bankruptcy court, eviction court, garnishment hearings, and asset seizure. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling and asked if she thought he had wanted us to refuse the apology. She said she thought he had known we would, and that pride, stubbornness, or whatever we wanted to call it, had kept us from admitting we were wrong. She added that now we were homeless, broke, and facing years of legal battles we couldn't win. The silent stretch between us was filled only by the hum of the air conditioning unit and traffic noise from the highway. I asked her if we should try calling him. She was quiet for a long moment and then asked what we would say, that we were wrong, that we were sorry, or that we would do whatever he wanted. She asked if I thought he would listen. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. Daniel's number was still in my contacts from that first desperate call 6 days ago. 6 days. A week ago, I had been unemployed but housed, and broke but functioning. Now I was living in a motel room with my elderly mother, watching our lives disappear into the legal system like water down a drain. I finally said I didn't know, but that what else did we have left to try? The San Diego Union Tribune conference room smelled like fresh coffee and nervous sweat. Television cameras lined the back wall while reporters checked their recording devices. At exactly 2:30, Eric and Molly took their seats at the polished table. Official documents were spread before them. I sat off to the side, watching 20 years of pain reach their conclusion. Eric cleared his throat, and his voice shook slightly as he began reading. "My name is Eric Collins. 20 years ago, my mother and I abandoned my father, Daniel Collins, at Los Angeles International Airport. We told him to find his own way home and laughed as we left him stranded with prepaid vacation tickets. This was a cruel and thoughtless act that caused unjust suffering to a man who had worked multiple jobs to provide for our family. Our actions contributed to the end of our family relationships and left Daniel alone and humiliated through our choices." The cameras recorded every word. Molly leaned forward to the microphone and said, "I was 46 years old enough to understand the impact of what we were doing. I led my son in this terrible decision, choosing cruelty over communication in our marriage." Eric continued by saying that the consequences they faced today were directly related to their behavior, and that Daniel's success despite their treatment showed his true character. A reporter raised her hand and asked how the abandonment had affected my father's life. Eric glanced at me before answering, saying that he had lost everything: his family, his sense of security, and his faith in the people who were supposed to love him, but that instead of becoming bitter, he had built something remarkable. When another reporter asked him to elaborate, he replied that my father had transformed pain into purpose. Every property he had purchased, every business success, and every charitable donation had all grown from the determination he had found after we had left him behind. Another reporter addressed Molly and asked her what she wanted people to understand about this situation. She replied that actions have consequences even 20 years later. She added that Daniel had achieved justice without revenge and that he could have destroyed them completely, but instead, he was giving them a chance they didn't deserve. The questions continued for 30 minutes, and each answer revealed another layer of the truth they had hidden for 2 decades. Finally, I stepped forward to the microphone. I said that 20 years ago, I had thought my life was ending. I had stood in that airport terminal feeling worthless, abandoned, and forgotten. But that moment had taught me something precious: that the only person who controls your response to adversity is you. I looked directly at the cameras and said that I hadn't pursued this for revenge but for justice, and that there was a difference. Revenge seeks to harm, but justice seeks to balance, and today the scales had been balanced. When a journalist asked what would happen now, I replied that Eric and Molly had the opportunity to rebuild their lives with honesty instead of manipulation. I said that the legal actions against them would end today, their debt was forgiven, and their chance at redemption was just beginning. The room fell quiet except for the whir of the camera motors. I continued by saying that family isn't just blood, but is earned through loyalty, support, and respect, and that today, we had all learned that lesson. An hour later, I sat alone in my car in the newspaper parking garage. The silence felt different now, not empty, but full and complete. My phone buzzed with messages from reporters, business associates, and friends who had seen the news coverage. I turned it off and started the engine. The drive back to La Jolla took me along the coast highway, with the ocean stretching endlessly to the horizon. 20 years ago, I had taken this same route from the airport, broken and humiliated. Today, I traveled it as a man who had proven that dignity survives abandonment, that success follows determination, and that justice patiently pursued always finds its mark. At home, I poured myself a scotch and stood at my study window. The harbor lights twinkled like promises in the gathering dusk. The abandoned man from the airport was finally at peace.